Imagine planning the perfect birthday party for your child. Balloons, decorations, invitations, sent weeks in advance. You've spared no expense. Yet when the day finally arrives, the room is empty. That's exactly what happened to the daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. She sat in her wheelchair, dressed in her favorite birthday dress, staring at rows of untouched cupcakes and unopened party favors. Her father, a man feared and respected in boardrooms around the world, stood helpless, watching his little girl's heart break in real time. But just when it seemed her birthday would end in silence and tears, a boy stepped forward. A boy who, on paper, had no place in the CEO's world. He wasn't rich, he wasn't well-connected, he was simply the son of the company's janitor. And what he said that day would change not only the girl's life, but the entire company forever. Chapter 1. The Empty Room. For all his success, Richard Langston had one soft spot: his daughter, Emily. She had been paralyzed after a tragic accident years earlier. And since then, every smile, every flicker of joy on her face had become priceless to him. He could handle hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations without flinching. But when it came to his daughter, he was fragile. That year, he promised her a birthday she would never forget. Invitations went out to her classmates weeks before. A lavish venue was booked, filled with streamers and pastel balloons. Cupcakes lined the tables, each one topped with glittering frosting. Emily had been counting down the days, clutching the guest list like a secret treasure. But as the party hour approached, Richard noticed something strange. The seats remained empty, the games untouched. He glanced at his watch, convincing himself they were simply late. Minutes stretched into an hour. Still, no one came. Emily's face, once lit with anticipation, began to dim. She sat quietly in her chair, the excitement draining from her eyes as she stared at the untouched pile of gift bags meant for her classmates. Richard tried to reassure her, but the truth was undeniable. No one was coming. The CEO who had built an empire suddenly felt powerless. He had built skyscrapers, toppled rivals, and commanded armies of employees, yet here he was, unable to deliver the one thing his daughter wanted most. Friends, and it wasn't just about a missed party, it was about what it meant. The cruel whispers that followed Emily since her accident, the way children avoided sitting next to her in class, the sideways glances of parents who didn't know how to explain her wheelchair to their kids. For Richard, each empty chair in that party hall felt like an accusation. He had promised Emily a day full of laughter, but all she got was silence. He tried to keep the party alive. He encouraged her to open her presents, tried to spark a smile with jokes, even considered calling in some of his executives' children, just to fill the room. But Emily knew. Children know when something isn't real. And then, in the corner of the room, Richard noticed someone. It was the janitor who cleaned the building late at night. The man most executives never even acknowledged. He had been asked to tidy up after the party. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was his son, a boy about Emily's age. The boy looked nervous, clutching a balloon string in his hand, watching Emily from afar. And then, as if the silence had weighed too heavy on him, he stepped forward. "Can I join?" It was a question simple enough on the surface, but in that cavernous, empty room, it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Emily looked up, startled. Richard froze, unsure how to respond. And in that moment, something shifted, a small flicker of hope in a day that had been defined by disappointment. The CEO who thought the party was ruined had no idea. This boy's courage was about to unravel secrets, test loyalties, and change the course of his company in ways he could never have imagined. The janitor's son's name was Marcus. He was quiet, small for his age, with wide, curious eyes that flickered between Emily and the abandoned party decorations. His clothes were simple, a little worn, and his sneakers had clearly seen better. Dazed at first, Richard hesitated. This was not what he envisioned when he promised his daughter a magical birthday. He imagined her surrounded by classmates, music, laughter, the kind of scene that would make her forget the chair she was confined to. A janitor's son wasn't supposed to be part of that picture. But when Emily's lips curled into the faintest smile at Marcus's question, Richard stepped aside. "Of course," he said quietly, and just like that, Marcus became the party. He picked up a balloon and made it squeak across his head until his hair stood up in a wild mess, sending Emily into her first genuine laugh of the day. He challenged her to a cupcake eating contest, taking comically large bites until frosting covered his face, making Emily giggle harder than she had in months. He even suggested games Richard had forgotten about, simple ones that didn't require crowds or expensive setups. For the first time all afternoon, Emily felt seen, not as the girl in the wheelchair, not as the daughter of a CEO, just as a kid who wanted to laugh and play. Richard stood back, watching with a mix of awe and shame. He had spent thousands on this event, performers, decorations, catering, yet the only thing his daughter needed was someone willing to sit with her, to look her in the eye, to treat her like she belonged. The sight of Marcus laughing with Emily etched itself into Richard's heart. But beneath that warmth, another feeling stirred. Guilt. Why had no one come? He had done everything right. He had sent invitations, offered transportation, even spoken directly to some of the parents. They had smiled, nodded, promised. And yet, when the day came, not a single child showed up. Richard knew the truth. His daughter's wheelchair wasn't just a chair, it was a barrier. To other children, she was different. To other parents, she was inconvenient, and that knowledge gnawed at him. As the evening drew on, Emily grew tired but happier than Richard had seen in months. When Marcus finally waved goodbye, clutching the leftover balloon like a trophy, Emily whispered, "Best birthday ever." Richard smiled, but inside, he knew this story wasn't over. Because if one boy could make Emily feel alive again, why couldn't the others? Why had the entire community turned away from his daughter? Richard Langston was a man who never accepted defeat, and he wasn't about to start now. The next day, Richard arrived at his glass-walled office earlier than usual. His mind wasn't on the quarterly reports stacked neatly on his desk, or the shareholders demanding his attention. It was on his daughter's empty party. He replayed the sight of those untouched chairs, the rows of unopened gift bags, the silence of a room meant for laughter. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about what it said, about people, about appearances, about the invisible lines society still drew, and Richard needed answers. He began quietly. First, he asked Emily's teachers, carefully disguising his questions as casual curiosity, but the responses he received were evasive. Parents had other commitments. Some said they misplaced the invitation. Others gave vague excuses about busy weekends. None of it felt true. Then, through the whispers of office gossip and hushed conversations overheard in school hallways, the truth began to emerge. The parents had spoken to each other before the party. They worried that their children would feel uncomfortable around Emily, that the sight of her wheelchair would be too much for them. Some even feared their kids would ask questions they weren't prepared to answer. And so, one by one, they chose convenience over compassion. Was stunned, these were the same people who shook his hand at charity events, who sent him holiday cards, who praised his family values in public. Yet behind closed doors, they had robbed his daughter of the simplest joy, friendship. That night, Richard sat in his study long after Emily had gone to bed. The house was quiet, but inside him, a storm raged. For years, he had poured his energy into building a corporation that commanded respect. He had earned loyalty, admiration, even fear. Yet none of that power could buy his daughter a single friend. And then his thoughts returned to Marcus, the boy who had shown up not because of wealth, or status, or obligation, but because he saw a lonely girl and asked a simple question, "Can I?" Richard couldn't shake it. The boy's presence had been like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. But it also highlighted the darkness around it, the cruel absence of everyone else. In that moment, Richard realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could let this incident fade into another painful memory, chalk it up to the unfairness of the world, or he could act. And Richard Langston was not a man who let things go. What he didn't know was that his decision to act would set in motion a chain of events that would ripple far beyond his family through his company, his community, and eventually, the entire country. Richard Langston had built his empire on vision, precision, and an uncompromising belief that problems existed only to be solved. That same mindset now turned toward something far more personal than quarterly earnings, his daughter's dignity. He couldn't erase the humiliation of that empty birthday. He couldn't take away the look in Emily's eyes as she glanced at rows of chairs meant for friends who never came. But what he could do was make sure it never happened again. And so, Richard crafted a plan. It began at his company headquarters, during a quarterly meeting that was supposed to be about expansion strategies. Instead, Richard stunned his board by introducing a new initiative, one that had nothing to do with profit margins. He called it the Inclusion Project. Its purpose was simple, yet radical: to create programs, events, and spaces where children with disabilities could play, learn, and celebrate alongside their peers without fear of being excluded. Schools would be partnered with, playgrounds redesigned, awareness campaigns launched. But Richard knew something else. This couldn't just be a charity gesture. It had to be a movement. At first, the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered about costs, others about optics. But Richard silenced them with a rare moment of raw vulnerability. He told them about Emily's birthday, about the silence of that room, about the boy named Marcus who had shown more courage and humanity than an entire neighborhood of adults. And for the first time in his career, Richard's voice cracked. "This isn't about my company's image," he said firmly. "This is about my daughter and every child like her. If the world won't open its doors, then we'll build new ones." The room fell silent. And slowly, one by one, heads began to nod. The Inclusion Project was born. But Richard didn't stop there. He knew that while programs could change environments, only stories could change hearts. So, he reached out to media contacts, crafted campaigns, and even hired documentary filmmakers. And at the center of that story was Marcus. Richard invited him and his father, the janitor, to dinner. At first, Marcus was shy. shrinking in his seat at the polished table that seemed too large for two guests of such modest means. But Emily's excitement dissolved the awkwardness. She chattered endlessly about their games, about the cupcake contest, about how Marcus made her birthday the best ever. Richard watched them, feeling a quiet gratitude he could never fully express. Marcus had given his daughter a gift no money could buy. Now, Richard would return the favor. He offered Marcus's father a promotion, not charity, but recognition for years of loyal, overlooked work. And he made Marcus the face of the first Inclusion Project campaign. A photo of a boy in scuffed sneakers holding a balloon beside a smiling girl in a wheelchair soon spread across social media with a simple caption, "Every child deserves a seat at the party." The response was overwhelming. Parents who once looked away now shared the post with teary captions. Schools called Richard's office, asking how they could be part of the project. Donations poured in. But not everyone was pleased. Some whispered that Richard was using his daughter's struggle for publicity. Others scoffed at the idea that one corporate campaign could change generations of prejudice. Richard didn't care, because every night, when Emily fell asleep clutching the balloon Marcus had left behind, Richard knew he had chosen the right fight, and deep down, he realized something else. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about every child who had ever been left sitting alone at a party. Every parent who had ever swallowed their tears in silence. Every family who had ever been made to feel that different meant unwelcome. Richard Langston was no longer just a CEO, he was a father on a mission, and nothing in the world was going to stop him. The year after Emily's forgotten birthday, something extraordinary happened. Her next party was no longer a private, whispered affair inside her home. It was held in the largest community hall in the city, decorated not with the cold touch of hired event planners, but with the warmth of volunteers who had come together for something greater than balloons and cake. The hall was packed. Children of every background, some in wheelchairs, some with braces, some who once stood at the margins of playground games, filled the space with laughter that shook the walls. And at the center of it all sat Emily, her wheelchair adorned with pink ribbons, her smile brighter than the candles that waited on her cake. But the true centerpiece wasn't Emily herself. It was Marcus. He stood proudly beside her, wearing the same scuffed sneakers, though now they were paired with a fresh shirt his father had bought just for the occasion. To the crowd, he wasn't just a boy anymore. He was a symbol, proof that kindness, even the smallest act of it, can ripple outward until it changes the world. When the cake was brought out, a hush fell over the hall. Emily closed her eyes and blew out the candles. The flame extinguished not in silence this time, but drowned in cheers, claps, and voices shouting her name. Tears blurred Richard Langston's vision as he watched. He thought back to the year before, to the silence, the shame, the hollow ache of watching his daughter's joy be stolen. That memory would always haunt him. But now, it was being rewritten, replaced by the sound of belonging. And yet, the true climax came not from the party itself, but from what followed in the months and years ahead. The Inclusion Project spread like wildfire. Schools adopted new programs where children learned not just math and reading, but empathy and compassion. Playgrounds, once designed with barriers, were rebuilt with ramps and swings that welcomed every child. And across the country, parents began to notice something remarkable: invitations. For the first time, children like Emily weren't being left out of playdates and parties. Their names appeared on guest lists, their presence not just tolerated, but celebrated. Media outlets picked up Marcus's story. They called him the boy who changed birthdays. Interviewers asked him what made him step forward that day. When no one else did, Marcus's answer was always the same: because I would have wanted someone to say yes to me. Those words echoed far beyond the cameras. They became the slogan of a movement. As the years passed, Emily grew older, her condition remaining, but her spirit unbroken. She never forgot that first birthday with Marcus, the day she was no longer invisible. She and Marcus remained close, bound not by circumstance but by a friendship forged in courage. And Richard, the CEO, once known for ruthless ambition, found that his greatest legacy wasn't measured in profits or buildings, but in the countless children who no longer sat alone in silence on their birthdays. The man who built an empire had, in the end, built something far greater. He had built belonging, and all of it began with a boy who raised his hand, looked at a forgotten girl, and asked a simple question: "Can I